The wire cleared on a Thursday afternoon. $2.9 billion. He looked at the number on his phone for exactly 40 seconds. Then he put the phone face down on the kitchen counter, walked to the window, and stood there in silence, in a city that didn't know, and didn't care, what had just happened. He was 26 years old. And he felt absolutely nothing. That's not a success story. That's a warning. And if you're the kind of person who can't stop working, can't stop building, can't stop wanting. This video is the most important thing you'll watch today. Because what nobody tells you about getting everything you were hungry for is this. The hunger doesn't stop. It doesn't even slow down. And if you don't understand why, you will spend your entire life chasing an arrival that doesn't exist. Part 1. This story starts in Gary, Indiana. 2001. There's a family that isn't poor enough for anyone to notice. That's the specific cruelty of a certain kind of broke. Not homeless. Not hungry. Not technically. Just the kind of family where the shoes are almost right. The jacket is close enough. Where a child learns to laugh at exactly the right moments so nobody looks too carefully. The father drives a forklift at a steel distribution center. Days only, because the night shift pays more. And he bid for it 3 times, and lost 3 times to men with more seniority and less reason to care. The mother works the front desk at a dental office she will never be able to afford as a patient. She brings home the sample toothbrushes. That is the extent of the dental benefit. The wall between the bedroom and the kitchen is thin. Thin enough that on Friday nights, a kid, lying in bed, can hear the sound of envelopes being sorted by urgency, stacked by which Bill screams loudest. No one taught his parents that skill. They just developed it. The way people develop any skill that survival requires. That sound. Paper against paper, quiet decisions made in the dark. That sound does something to a child that no classroom ever could. It teaches them that the world has a system, and that some people are inside it. And some people are sorting envelopes at midnight, hoping they make it to the other side of the month. By 16, this kid has read more about business than most adults twice his age. Not theory. Mechanics. Where margins go. Why the same product costs 3 times as much, depending on who sells it, and how. He understands distribution economics better than most MBAs ever will. And that knowledge sits in his chest like something that doesn't belong there yet. Then one night, he watches his father come home from work and say nothing about the supervisor role that just went to someone else. Someone from outside. Someone who had never done the job. Someone for whom the job was a title, not a livelihood. His father doesn't say a word about it at dinner. His mother asks if anyone wants more rice. His father reaches for the rice. And in that single, quiet moment, something crystallizes inside a 16-year-old boy with a clarity that is much too heavy for someone his age. The system was not designed with his father in mind. He decides, sitting at that table, watching that hand reach for that bowl of rice, that he will learn the system well enough to build one of his of Part 2. His name is Calvin Marsh. 31 years old, $22 million. He speaks at the high school's entrepreneurship day because his nephew goes there, and he owes his sister a favor. He is the only person in the room who does not seem impressed by being in the room. Everyone else is half asleep. This kid is taking notes. After the assembly, he follows Calvin to the parking lot. Doesn't plan it. His feet just go. Calvin is loading into a car that costs more than everything in that Gary, Indiana house combined, and the kid says, "What part of the speech was true?" Calvin stops. He looks at him the way people look at something that moved when it wasn't supposed to. "Which part did you think wasn't?" "The part about passion. Nobody builds something real on passion. Passion is what you say when you don't want to explain the actual reason." There's a silence. Then Calvin takes out his phone. "You got a number?" He sends him a Dropbox link, raw market analysis documents. No narrative, no framing. The kind of data someone dumps before a pitch meeting to see if the other person does their homework. "If you can tell me what's missing from these by Sunday, text me." He finds 4 gaps by Saturday morning. Calvin calls back in 11 minutes. For the next 18 months, this kid is Calvin's unpaid research assistant. Probably exploitation. Almost certainly the best education available to someone who can't afford the alternative. 2-hour bus ride each way. food from home, because he's done the math on what 3 years of small daily expenses costs at 8% compounded. And the number permanently changed how he looks at vending machines. In that office, he learns something even Calvin can't teach him. He learns it from Teresa, Calvin's head of operations, logistics background, speaks in constraints, has an answer before you finish describing the problem. Teresa teaches him how to see a business as a system of dependencies. Which parts break first? Which parts look broken but aren't? Where the actual leverage lies versus where people think it does. He also does 4 years of college, partial scholarship, business and computer science, working the internship in parallel, sleeping 5 hours a night. Living entirely in the distance between what he is and what he is trying to become. There is a version of his early 20s that other people have. Weekends that belong to themselves. Relationships without expiration dates. The freedom of not calculating the opportunity cost of every hour. He watches it happen around him and feels, not envy, something more precise than envy, the recognition that he is choosing, and that what he is choosing over is a kind of ordinary he will spend the rest of his life trying to remember clearly. At 20, sacrifice still feels like strategy. Part 3. He is 21. He has an idea, not a startup idea. Everyone has those, a specific, operational, unglamorous idea. Mid-market logistics companies hemorrhage 15 to 20% of their margin on fragmented last-mile contracting. A software layer that standardizes those contracts and automates the renegotiation cycles could capture half that margin. For whoever builds it first, he has mapped it. He has a working prototype. 8 months, a 2-bedroom apartment, a classmate who asks almost no questions. He shows Calvin offers to fund it. $150,000 for 35%. He says no. The word arrives before the decision does. He's never said no to Calvin Marsh. But 35% at seed means he owns nothing meaningful by Series B. He's run the dilution math across 4 funding scenarios. It costs everything at scale. Calvin looks at him for a long moment, then smiles. Not warmly, but with the specific professional respect of someone who has just been beaten at something. You're going to need more than $150,000 anyway. I know. He finishes his degree because he's 3 months from the end, and his mother would not forgive an incomplete. He graduates on Saturday. He incorporates on Monday. He calls his father from the parking lot after the ceremony. His father is quiet for a long time, then says, "Okay." One word, the weight of every sorted envelope, every skipped promotion, every bowl of rice passed in silence at a dinner table in Gary, Indiana. Okay. He raises $8 million from 4 angels. Gives up 14%, spends 7 months making the product actually work before charging a single dollar. Because by the time he prices it, he already knows it works. He prices it high signals certainty. He closes more contracts in the next quarter than the entire preceding year. Series A, Series B. Each round a negotiation. Each negotiation a test of exactly how badly you need the money. Because the best time to raise is when you don't need it, which means the system rewards people who already have enough. He files that away, doesn't examine it too closely. He can't afford to yet. By 24, he has 180 employees. By 25, 480. He stops knowing everyone's name somewhere around 250. This bothers him more than he says out loud to anyone. The acquisition offer arrives on a Tuesday. $2.9 billion. He takes it. He is 26 years old. The wire clears on a Thursday afternoon. He looks at the number for 40 seconds. He puts the phone face down on the counter. He stands at the window, and he feels the hum low. Directionless, like a television left on in another room. Part 4. He buys his parents a house. His father walks through every room twice, touching the walls, not saying much. His mother stands in the kitchen and cries without trying to stop. This is the only moment in the entire year that feels proportionate to what happened. Everything else is lawyers, board seats, security protocols, a communications manager who reviews everything he says publicly, an assistant who manages everything privately. He checks the exits in every room automatically now, without deciding to. 14 months after the acquisition, a professional CEO is installed. Technically, he agreed to it. He signed the paperwork. but the acquiring company made clear, in the polite way that power makes things clear, that a founder running a nearly $3 billion integration is a risk profile they aren't underwriting. He becomes Chief Strategy Officer. The title means, we will put you in front of investors and you will make the business sound inevitable. He watches the product get remade. Features deprecated for portfolio alignment. Pricing restructured in ways that punish the exact mid-market customers he built the thing for. Culture rebranded into the language of culture, without any of the content. What he loses is not the control. He expected to lose the control. What he loses is something harder to name, the iteration. The specific feeling of watching something become what it was supposed to be. The problem that finally gives at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, and the only people who know are the four of you in the room. That process, that was the only part that ever felt real. Now it belongs to someone else, and he has to sit in glass-walled offices and say nothing, because he signed the paperwork. He was never the company. He was the origin story. Origin stories are useful for press releases. They don't run the quarterly business review. He resigns on a Wednesday. Mutual language. Stock fully vested. Number unchanged. This is the collapse. Not poverty. Not failure. Irrelevance. The specific modern violence of becoming optional inside something you built. Part 5. He tries stopping. 3 months. House in Nashville. Mornings with no meetings. He takes walks. He reads the books he's been meaning to read for 5 years. He has dinner with people who have nothing to do with anything he's built. It is the most uncomfortable he has ever been, because the hunger doesn't know what to do with comfort. It was built on that kitchen table in Gary, on the sorted envelopes, on his father's face the night the supervisor role went to someone else. It was built to solve a problem, and the problem is solved. The house exists, the retirement exists, the forklift shift is done, but the hunger doesn't know that. The hunger is still running. It doesn't check the account balance. It just runs. 6 months after he resigns, he incorporates again. New city, new problem. Smarter this time, leaner, built on everything the first one cost him. The seed round closes in 9 days. At the first all hands, 43 people are looking at him, and he feels the hum again. Low. Directionless, the television in the other room. He is 28 years old. He has done this once. He will do it again. He already knows. Somewhere in Gary right now, there is a 16-year-old sitting in a school assembly. Most of the room is asleep. Someone in an expensive car is explaining success in the version that makes the room feel safe. The version where passion leads to purpose, hard work leads to wealth, and wealth leads to peace. The kid is taking notes. He doesn't know yet what he's really writing down. He thinks he's learning how to get out. He doesn't know yet that getting out and getting free are different destinations, and that the distance between them is the part nobody puts in the speech. Because here's what they never tell you. The wound that drives you doesn't heal when the money arrives. The wound is the engine, and the same relentlessness that builds an empire. The refusal to be satisfied, the hunger that outlasted the poverty that built it, is the exact same thing that makes every arrival feel like nothing. You can get out, but you cannot outrun the thing that made you want to. The question isn't whether you'll succeed. The question is whether you'll still know why you started, and whether that reason will be enough to keep you whole. When the number clears, and the phone goes face down, and the city outside your window doesn't know your name. He is 28. He is building again, and he is standing at the window, still waiting for something proportionate to arrive. If this hits something in you, if you recognized yourself in that hunger, that relentlessness, that restless need to build, then you already know this wasn't just someone else's story. The most dangerous thing isn't failing, it's succeeding at the wrong thing, in the wrong direction, for a reason you stopped understanding years ago. Think about that, and if you want to go deeper into the psychology of high achievers, why? We build, what it costs, and what it actually means to want something. Subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel is for. The door is about to open. It always does.